The Mako anti-ship missiles scream into the upper atmosphere, their engines blazing as they slice through the thinning air, reducing drag and gaining even more speed. Aboard HMS Queen Elizabeth, alarms blare. The fleet's air defense frigate locks onto the incoming threat, launching interceptors in a desperate bid to stop the onslaught. The Mako missiles glide at hypersonic speeds, executing a series of turns while pushing speeds in excess of Mach 5. Too fast, too erratic for the interceptors to lock on. The enemy missiles dive down on their prey, piercing through the hull of Britain's flagship. A split second later, the detonation tears through the Queen Elizabeth, destroying steel bulkheads and gutting her from within. The pride of Britain's fleet is left a broken, burning wreck. This scenario is just one example of the many challenges facing Britain's newest aircraft carriers, the so-called Pride of the Royal Navy. These cutting-edge warships are supposed to be a symbol of Britain's strength, yet they are barely able to operate. So how did the Royal Navy allow things to get this bad? We'll reveal all on today's episode of the Infographic Show. British aircraft carriers have a new enemy, and it's not Russia. The Queen Elizabeth aircraft carriers are the most advanced and largest ships to ever serve in the Royal Navy, powerful enough to take on entire enemy fleets on their own. Their fleet consists of two vessels, the HMS Queen Elizabeth and the HMS Prince of Wales, so far. Initial plans called for a third ship, as typically a modern navy has 1/3 of the fleet at sea, 1/3 in maintenance and 1/3 in training or post-maintenance workup cycles. But budget constraints sank that idea. The third Queen Elizabeth-class carrier was scrapped before it even left the drawing board. And that's not the only serious financial problems facing the class. Despite having two carriers, Britain doesn't even have enough aircraft for one of them, but more on that soon. The carriers are the flagships of the Royal Navy, designed to do everything from support amphibious operations to carry out strike missions and deliver humanitarian aid. They displace 65,000 tons, making them a full 3 times larger than the Invincible-class carriers they replaced, with a length of 932 feet. With a full air wing on board, her crew swells to 1,600 personnel, making each carrier a small town at sea. The carriers are designed specifically around the F-35 naval variant, featuring a ski jump ramp rather than catapults, as seen on most carriers her size. This is made possible by the powerful engine on board the F-35, which means that unlike Russia's aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, British planes don't have to sacrifice much on fuel or armaments just to get airborne. The carriers, however, can also carry other complements of aircraft, including Apache attack helicopters to support amphibious landings, Merlin early warning and anti-submarine aircraft, Chinooks for heavy lifting, and Wildcat helicopters for multi-role operations. Facing serious staffing issues, the Royal Navy turned to automation in order to reduce crew requirements by as much as 1/3. This also saves on operational costs, a key concern for a Navy that can't afford to actually field all of the ships it owns. But more on that as well soon. A unique design feature of the Queen Elizabeth class is in the Twin Islands. With aircraft carriers typically having only one island, this actually makes the ship more survivable. It separates air operations from navigation and allows for redundancy and added space between the ship's engines. This way, one disastrous strike won't mean the elimination of the carrier's full capabilities. And this is good, because the Queen Elizabeth class is facing some serious global threats. Despite being built for the F-35, Britain finds itself unable to fully equip its carriers with the advanced fighters. In fact, just to make only one carrier operational, the Royal Navy has to borrow fighter aircraft from the Royal Air Force. This is representative of the dire straits of the British military, which is increasingly being downgraded from its former heavyweight title as a premier global power. An American defense official called it a regional power, and even that designation was, quote, fading fast. The assertion drew much ire in Britain, but British defense officials quickly confirmed the observation. The British military is not just shrinking, it's in such dire straits that it is completely incapable of defending the British Isles without Allied help. This has driven much of Britain's willingness to supply weapons to Ukraine. The belief is that it is far smarter to fight Russia in Ukraine than to risk a direct attack on the British Isles, one they may not be able to defend against. The problem for Britain is that the F-35s are extremely capable but also very expensive, at around £100 million per fighter. An initial order of 74 aircraft changed to just 48. Much like the ships, only a portion of the total air fleet is ever available for operations, which means that this figure would still allow a British carrier to deploy with a full complement of 36 fighters. But that's only one carrier. The other carrier would be stuck at home, soaking up taxpayer money in idle maintenance cost. This has drawn much ire from the British public, with a lot of pressure to retire one of the two ships. But having been commissioned less than 10 years ago, mothballing them now would be a massive waste of money. To alleviate the cost of an F-35 fleet, Not only were the total number of aircraft cut down, but the British military initiated what they called a Joint Lightning Force. This meant that the RAF and the Royal Navy would share F-35s and thus reduce the costs of duplicative maintenance, training, and logistics. This approach comes with a lot of cost-saving benefits for a cash-strapped British military, but it also comes with significant downsides as well. Compared to the F-35A or the Air Force model, Britain's F-35Bs have reduced capabilities due to their need to be hardened for the rigors of carrier landings. It also has smaller fuel tanks due to the lift fan used for vertical landing, with the F-35B having a range of just over 1,000 miles versus 1,400 miles for the A model. It also carries approximately 600 pounds less than the A model, sacrificing total weapons payload. The sacrifices don't end there. The F-35A boasts a G-load limit of 9 Gs, compared just to 7 Gs for the B model. This makes the A variant the superior dogfighter, capable of executing more extreme maneuvers in air-to-air combat. The B is also slower, and it must burn more fuel to achieve the same speeds as the A model. It also sacrifices its internal gun, forcing it to rely on missiles for dogfighting and limiting its ability to provide close air support during amphibious operations. The lift fan system also means that the B model has significantly longer downtime due to increased and more costly maintenance. This, in turn, increases the amount of time it takes to turn an F-35B around for another mission compared to an F-35A. Lastly, the stress of the carrier landings means that the aircraft experiences significant strain, shortening its lifespan significantly versus the A model. Despite all of these sacrifices, the F-35B is the best naval multi-role aircraft ever built, if only because of its extreme survivability and ability to penetrate into denied enemy territory. It's just that the British military must choose if it's going to field an air force of F-35s or a carrier with F-35s, and if it chooses the carrier option in wartime, it's only going to be able to equip a single carrier. The problem with the British military budget has multiple fronts. On one hand, the entirety of Britain has suffered after the nation chose to leave the EU, with the UK's own Office for Budget Responsibility projecting a total GDP loss of 4% as a result. The rising cost of shipping has also hurt British business, making them less competitive against European counterparts who can transport goods more cheaply. Lower shipping costs mean lower prices, leading to higher sales, an advantage the UK is struggling to match. The limited military budget is being pulled in multiple directions, forcing tough choices. A significant portion is now being consumed by a challenge facing every nuclear-armed nation: modernization. Since the end of the Cold War, nuclear-armed states largely neglected their arsenals, believing the chance of nuclear conflict was remote. But with rising global tensions, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China's growing assertiveness in the Pacific, and now the US distancing itself from European allies, nations are scrambling to modernize their aging nuclear stockpiles. Modern threats mean Cold War-era weapons are less survivable and less guaranteed to actually reach their targets with precision. The march of time has also significantly worn down delivery systems, with some American missiles having first been installed in the 1970s. To maintain a credible nuclear deterrent, nations must invest heavily, and the costs are extreme. The United States alone is committing up to $1 trillion to upgrade its nuclear arsenal, forcing tough financial trade-offs. Even cutting-edge programs like the 6th-generation NGAD fighter are being put on pause due to budget constraints. The UK, meanwhile, is dedicating £3 billion a year to maintenance and modernization of its own nuclear weapons out of a nearly £60 billion budget. Also eating into the budget for the Queen Elizabeth-class carriers is the adoption and integration of drones into the British military. Identified as a key priority, after observing the war in Ukraine, Britain is increasingly looking to drones to expand its military capabilities. It's an appealing solution for a nation grappling with budget constraints and recruitment struggles. Even before facing the enemy in combat, Queen Elizabeth carriers face another serious challenge. The Royal Navy doesn't have the capabilities to support their own carriers. An aircraft carrier is the most powerful conventional weapon mankind has ever invented. Even a small carrier can launch enough firepower to cripple a nation's defenses. But despite its capabilities, carriers are completely useless on their own. Send a fully equipped aircraft carrier into battle against an enemy fleet, and while it might take out a few enemy ships, the carrier itself is unlikely to survive. This is why you've never seen a carrier go to war alone. Instead, they operate as part of what used to be called a carrier battle group and is today renamed to a carrier strike group. CSGs are the ultimate naval meta, and even a small CSG facing off against a larger enemy surface action group, or SAG, without a carrier is going to come out on top. It's not just about launching long-range precision strikes from hundreds of miles away. Carrier-based aircraft provide unmatched situational awareness, allowing supporting ships to engage enemy targets they can't even detect themselves. But support ships do more than provide firepower against enemy fleets. They also screen the ocean for enemy submarines, a carrier's worst enemy. A modern CSG will feature anti-submarine warfare or ASW ships, screening the fleet's every move. They also include an attack submarine or two of their own. And then there's logistical ships that provide fuel and rearmament for a carrier deployed at sea. And Britain can't provide enough of any of those capabilities on its own. Every time that a Queen Elizabeth carrier takes to the high seas, she does so only after extensive coordination has been undertaken with allied navies. The Royal Navy relies heavily on the U.S. Navy for this logistical support and to provide escort vessels, a turn of events that would have spun the head of any Royal Navy captain in the early 1800s. Typically, a CSG will operate with between 4 to 8 escort vehicles, but in 2024, the Royal Navy has only 18 total ships available for escort duties. When you account for workup cycles and maintenance, this means only about 4 to 5 ships are actually available for deployment. And having ships isn't enough because it's not like all ships are built alike. The Royal Navy has 6 Type 45 destroyers for air defense and 12 Type 23 frigates for anti-submarine warfare. On top of this, the Royal Navy still has commitments to patrol the North Atlantic for Russian subs, act as a deterrent, and in defense of British interests in the Pacific. The prospect of future cooperation with the U.S. Navy puts into serious doubt the reliability of British carriers. To make matters even worse, with the American president threatening military action to seize Greenland, putting the U.S. in direct conflict with a NATO ally, Britain's Queen Elizabeth carriers could face an unthinkable scenario. Not only would they lose access to American logistics and escort ships, but they might also find themselves squaring off against the very fleet they once relied on. And yet, there's no relief in sight, as the Royal Navy is set to remain a small navy, despite the production of newer, more advanced ships. This means that the future Royal Navy will be very dependent on allies to be effective. The real question, though, is how will a Queen Elizabeth ship face up against modern threats from its most likely threats? In a war against the United States, the Queen Elizabeth class will be facing a variety of anti-ship threats. The mainstay of the U.S. anti-ship arsenal is the Harpoon missile, a dated Cold War-era subsonic weapon whose threat against modern defenses is extremely questionable. Partnered with a modern Dutch, French, or Spanish air defense frigate, a Queen Elizabeth carrier would fare quite well against this outdated threat. Likewise, SM-6 missiles that are typically used for air defense, converted into anti-ship mode, would likely pose a little threat against modern air defenses. The real threat comes from the LRASM, and a family of new hypersonic anti-ship missiles currently in development or ready to be fielded. The LRASM, for one, opts for stealth over speed, relying on its stealthy design and radar-absorbent materials to remain undetected until coming into very close range. At that point, interception time is significantly reduced, making the LRASM very survivable when launched in volleys. Hypersonic missiles, meanwhile, like the American Mako, the Russian Zircon, and Chinese CM-401, present a critical threat to modern air defenses. These missiles either rely on moving so fast they significantly reduce interception time, or on combining speed and maneuverability to evade enemy air defenses. The addition of maneuverability is what really makes hypersonic weapons game changers, as they complicate interception solutions with sudden and random course changes. As of yet, no one really knows how defensible large ships like the Queen Elizabeth class are from hypersonic weapons. The US seems pretty confident that its big carriers can be defended from Chinese and European hypersonic weapons, as it keeps building them. For their part, the Chinese also seem confident that their carriers will be survivable, as they're investing heavily into building at least an 8-strong carrier fleet. Hypersonic missiles threaten to fundamentally reshape naval warfare, just as aircraft carriers once did. History has shown that military revolutions aren't always obvious until war is already underway. Before World War II, battleships were seen as the ultimate naval weapon, with nations pouring massive investments into their fleets. But once the conflict began, it became clear battleships were little more than floating artillery platforms, outmatched by the power and versatility of carrier-based aircraft. The problem with making a similar discovery today is that modern carriers are astronomically more expensive than World War II ships. The loss of even a single carrier represents a significant financial blow to even the richest of nations. The loss of just half of America's supercarriers in one short war would be an economic crisis of the highest order, but the richest nation on Earth would weather it nonetheless. The same cannot be said about Britain's Elizabeth-class carriers. The loss of this much combat power is not something that the much smaller British military can easily replace. Each carrier represents 3 to 4 conventional warships that could have been built instead. That's not the only threat on the Queen Elizabeth's horizon, though, because the future of naval warfare has already been seen in Ukraine and even the Middle East. Ukraine has revolutionized naval warfare by basically breaking all the rules of naval warfare. Despite lacking large surface combat ships, medium vessels, or even a single submarine, Ukraine has managed to outmaneuver and effectively neutralize the world's second-largest navy fleet by size. Today, Russian ships are so threatened by Ukraine that they've had to pull back even further than their Crimean home ports. They have retreated all the way back to the Sea of Azov or the very easternmost stretches of the Black Sea. The weapon behind Russia's naval defeat isn't a massive battleship or a high-tech submarine. It's a simple drone boat. Costing only tens of thousands of dollars each, these unmanned vessels have taken on Russian warships worth tens or even hundreds of millions, and they are winning. Today, Ukraine operates these drone boats in groups of up to half a dozen, but a more advanced power with more funding could operate entire swarms of drone boats. And this is a threat that the Queen Elizabeth carrier is unequipped at the moment to face. To highlight the danger, in October 12 of 2000, Al-Qaeda terrorists managed to inflict a mission kill on the USS Cole, using nothing more than an inflatable boat filled with explosives. At enough range, a Queen Elizabeth carrier might be able to use its close-in weapon system, or CWIS, to target drone boats in the water. Typically, those radar-guided Gatling guns are used to take on aircraft or incoming high-speed missiles, but in some cases they could be used against small surface threats. The carrier is also equipped with electronic warfare systems that remain classified, but are designed to jam and spoof the targeting and guidance systems of incoming missiles. Such systems could also be used against drones, especially for severing communications back to a controller. However, many modern drones are increasingly using AI to automatically guide a drone to its target if a connection to a human controller is severed. Other than that, the Queen Elizabeth class must rely on its aircraft, both fighters and helicopters, for drone defense. There is one type of drone this strategy won't work against: the flying kind. In 2024, the Houthis attempted to attack a U.S. Navy ship using drones. The attack was foiled due to the support of nearby ships and the fact that the number of drones was insufficient to overcome defenses. However, drone attacks on civilian ships have been successful to date. In the future, an adversary with more resources could deploy massive drone swarms against British ships like the Queen Elizabeth class. Iran just conducted such an attack against Israel, launching dozens of drones simultaneously to overwhelm Israel's defenses. It took the combined efforts of Jordan, the US, France, and Israel to down the Iranian drones, showcasing the importance of cooperation with allies. The Queen Elizabeth class's best defense against a drone attack is its ability to stay far out at sea and remain mobile, making it difficult for an enemy drone swarm to maintain persistent tracking. It's when it's operating close to shore, or when forced to transit choke points like the Panama Canal or Suez Canal, that the carrier becomes particularly vulnerable. As drone technology improves, though, and they are adopted in increasing numbers, the threat escalates. Of greatest concern to the Queen Elizabeth class is the mass adoption of drones by both the United States and China. The U.S. Navy has committed to adopting thousands of drones, with as much as 100 larger surface and subsurface drones to accompany manned ships. Swarms of cheap, easy-to-build, quick-to-replace drones could pose a critical threat to the Queen Elizabeth class, as well as to other carriers around the world. And yet, even drone swarms can't achieve the same level of power projection and flexibility that a carrier air wing can. Britain finds itself in an impossible situation where it needs aircraft carriers it can't afford, but it also can't afford to actually lose them in combat. The future of the Royal Navy and the Queen Elizabeth class looks grim indeed. Are aircraft carriers still the ultimate naval weapon, or are new threats like hypersonic missiles and drone swarms making them obsolete? Do you think the Royal Navy is prepared for the future of warfare? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Now go check out Evolution of Aircraft Carriers, or click this other video instead.